listening to the Mark Bradford Alchemy for Life podcast.
Let's learn about refugees from someone who actually settles them. I'm here with Jeffrey Kirk. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello.
As I normally start every show, I ask the person to tell us what they do, and as we know, that's not who you are. So tell us a little bit about what you do.
In my business, I help other businesses get seen online. So effectively, I'm helping them show up in the search results, get traffic to their website, get people taking action on their website, hopefully turning people who are searchers into clients for their businesses.
And you have an interesting way of doing that too, because there's a lot of people that say they do SEO and search ranking and all that stuff. And your way is a little bit different. Can you just give us a brief synopsis of what makes you so different?
Yeah, sure. I've been helping businesses online for more than 20 years. So I'm not coming from a position of, hey, I just learned this stuff in a book and these are the best practices I should follow. Instead, I take a look at when a business is a prospect, I take a look at their website, I take a look at how it's showing up in the search results, I take a look at their competitors, I try to find where are the weak areas that we can easily improve, the low-hanging fruit. How can we get the results that we want as fast as we possibly can? And then start working on some more of the long-term things. But part of my process, I've created it. I call it the Authority Visibility System. And it's really a rather unique in that I can help my clients get their website and their business showing up in the search results in a very short time, meaning within days to weeks at the most, instead of like typical SEO where you're talking maybe 6 months or a year, and in some cases, if there's a lot of competition, even 18 months to make a big dent in search result positioning. So right. I'm looking at how can we start getting results right away so that we can make a difference for that business. So that's kind of my perspective.
Well, that makes sense. And speaking of making a difference, first of all, I think that's very fascinating. We're going to make sure there's links to your actual website so that people can engage you if they'd like and learn more about the Authority Visibility System. And I think that's really cool. And that's what actually made us originally connect. But you mentioned making a difference. And as we've found out that when people spend their time, energy, and resources, they don't just focus on a narrow band. People have other stuff going on. And the wonderful thing about people is they have so many facets. And one of your other facets, which also makes a difference, is what we started chatting about. So can I also have you tell us about your secret identity, or
Sure.
vice versa, however you want to say that? Because I also have a secret identity, so I totally get that. So if you want to expand on that, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah. I help refugees from other countries get started with a new life here in the United States. And I started working on this in 2001. I've been a little bit less active over the past few years for a variety of different reasons. But back in 2001, there was a real need in southeastern Wisconsin to be able to help refugees that were coming here. And let me take a step back to explain what a refugee is, because in the current political and news cycles, there's lots of talk of refugees and immigrants and words being thrown around and accusations being made, but refugees have a very specific definition. And I'm not going to read the official definition, but to summarize it, refugees are people who have fled their home country for fear of their lives or fear of their families' lives. And they end up in a different country. Usually it's across the border from wherever they started. And at that point, they're not refugees yet. All they are is people who fled their homeland. So we talk about the southern border of the United States today and people arriving down there. They're not refugees because they haven't met the full definition of a refugee. And part of that definition is that the UN has declared them as refugees. Up until that point, they're perhaps asylum seekers. They're they are all immigrants, no matter how they've arrived to a country. They're immigrants, but they're not refugees until their status has been determined, and that they have demonstrated that they have fled for fear of their lives. And once they are refugees, you often hear in other countries refugee camps, and these are set up for all these influx of people that have fled their homeland, and they're waiting somewhere for something to happen. And in most cases, it's go home. Everybody wants to go home. We all have our home. It's the place we grew up. It's the place we love. It's the place we want to be. So for someone to leave that home is a traumatic experience. They don't want to do it. It's like the last resort. It's their last hope to live, is to flee their home. So if they have the opportunity to go back home, most want to do that. But sometimes they can't, and they give up on that hope. And the United Nations then offers the opportunity for some refugees to be placed in a third country. And when I was working with refugees, that's the scenario we're looking at, where the United States is the third country. It's the second country is where the refugee fled to and were declared as refugees. And that's a huge process, often takes multiple years. And then they're allowed to go somewhere else. And a fraction of 1% end up in the United States. And when they do, we want them to be able to start life over with support, because at least my goal and the goal of our team and everybody I've worked with refugee resettlement, we want them to become self-sufficient, contributing members of our society. We want them to have a good life and contribute just like everyone else is, so that they're part of the fabric of our nation. And our goal when we would help a refugee family was to get them there within 6 months. And that was aggressive, but we figured there's not many people who can complain about that because we'd get grief. We'd get people like today complaining about immigrants, and we had to have ways to deal with that. And helping someone become self-sufficient quickly is a way to deal with that. And self-sufficiency, that is, they've got jobs, they've got their own housing, they're paying their own rent. We've helped 8 to 10, depending on how you count the numbers, families that we helped resettle here in the Waukesha area, and several of them now own homes. So they've been very successful, and they're doing great.
Well, that's some complete information. That you answered a lot of questions there. So you clearly have had to talk about this a few times.
Yes, definitely.
Right. And I know that not only have you had to talk about it, but you're like me in that you kind of like documenting things, and that served you really well. So let me take a step back. Okay. You originally said that you got into this in 2001, and I think you had mentioned originally that it was sort of a one-time thing, and you sort of wrote down how it all worked. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that is.
Okay, but
go ahead.
But you've also told us that you've done 8 to 10 families, so clearly you've done it again.
Yes.
So this writing down of how things work, like a system, which I'm in love with systems, it means that you then went back to your system that you recorded very, very smartly and said, okay, we're going to do this again. Let's do that. So how did you go from the first time to the next 8 to 10 times?
Sure. So back in 2001, which, by the way, our first refugee family arrived on September 7th, 2001. And anybody listening to this probably knows what happened on September 11th, 2001. Pretty much the exact opposite of what we were trying to achieve. We were trying to help people, and 4 days later, they're very bad. Yes. Very bad loss of life. And the refugees we were helping, we didn't have an apartment for them yet. We weren't exactly up on how to make all that happen. So they were living in our house. We had a lower level which had a bedroom and a bathroom and a living area, and so the whole family, it was a family of 5. they could live down there while we lived in the rest of the house. And they had fled the war in Bosnia, and they had thought the war had kind of followed them here. They were fearful, and I
I can
ended up.
imagine.
I'm deviating a little from the question, but I ended up getting out some maps and showing where we are relative to New York and how big the United States is compared to where they came from, and try to show that perspective a little bit. But this allowed some closeness to start developing, and we became really good friends over time with this family.
I
And
think that's
and,
wonderful.
and it was tough because they had fled the war, and the father in this family was quite literally blown up, and he was taken away as dead. In the morgue, they discovered he was still alive, and ended up getting him to a hospital and put back together. And he had numerous surgeries over the next year, but he was able to leave. And that wasn't the end of their story, but eventually they made it here. And I'm bringing this up because it was difficult getting him a job, because though he could walk and he could stand, much of his abdominal muscles were missing. So he couldn't stand for long periods of time. And we think about people coming to this country who don't have a good grasp of English. What can they do? And it's often physical jobs. Well, he couldn't take a physical job. So we found work for his wife, the mom in the family, and the oldest teenager was able to get work, but the dad, he was a tough case. And so we worked hard and found different things that he could potentially do. And some of them he refused for a variety of different reasons. But eventually we were kind of burning out on that, and thought, well, he's a grown man. We've had these conversations in the past about why it's important for him to get a job, and let's just give him some space. Maybe he can do something. And we effectively told him that we're now cutting back on our efforts to help him get a job. And within a week, he had his own.
Mm-hmm.
He had learned enough through the process and had made enough contacts that he was able to move forward and get a great job on his own that allowed him to sit and stand. It allowed him to grow and really help his family and feel like the man he wanted to be, the one he used to be back home before the war started, who could take care of his family and do those kind of things. And that just really opened our eyes. And throughout this entire process, as you brought up, I'm writing down what we did, because I'm thinking not necessarily that we were going to do it again, but that there was some neat moments here that should be captured. And it was less than a year after this family was then on their own that we were approached by Lutheran Social Services, who brought us this first family. They asked if we would do it again. And I went back to my team and said, hey, are any of you guys interested in helping another family? And every single one of them said, yes, absolutely, let's do it. And so I got out my notes. Mm-hmm. And part of the notes was things that other people had given me, because working with Lutheran Social Services, we had to track some of our activities. So I had all that tracking information as well. And so I looked at all the notes and I said, okay, we're doing it a second time, but we learned a lot the first time. So, and we had a successful outcome. So therefore we must be pretty good at this. So let's just take what we learned and we'll do it better this time. And then what we found, the second family wasn't from Bosnia, they were from Afghanistan. And their view of life was absolutely completely different from the first family. Mm-hmm. Their experiences were completely different from the first family. Our first family was a complete family unit. Everyone was alive. The second family, the dad was missing. He had been killed by the Taliban. And so it was a family of women, or really a mom and mid-teen and younger girls with a very young boy. At the time, I think he was maybe 2 or 3 years old. So the only male in the family was the youngest. And they didn't really have a great understanding of anything that life may throw at them here in the United States. Our style of living was just so dramatically different. So what we had learned with our first family, though it helped, it wasn't complete. And so we had to learn a whole lot more. And I figured if we're helping a second family, maybe we're destined to do more. So I kept more notes on, well, what did we have to do different? What did we have to do more of? And how did that work out? And
so you kept refining the system, and it just kept getting better and better.
Absolutely.
You kept building on the foundation that you had originally created, and thankful to your past self, you had built a fairly large foundation, but also built off of that. So that's really awesome.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So each family was continuing to add to the information that we already had.
Right. Very, very, very cool. And so, like you said, you've done something like 8 to 10, and this is as the reason I had you tell us what your quote unquote real job is in the beginning is so that people can see all this effort you're putting into this thing we're spending all the time on, but you also do this other thing. And I think that's really important for people to see, because people sometimes get these blinders on and they say, I'm an X, I'm a Y, I'm a Z. But a lot of people are an A and an F and a G and a 7. You know, they have a lot of stuff going on. Everyone is very multifaceted, and I keep running into people that I call dual-brained, and it's something that I talk about all the time. And that, you know, there are these people that have a super strong creative side and a super strong logic side, and that's what I have. And that's, in the beginning, frustrated me, and then I embraced it, and it made magical things for me. So there are also people who have a need to do a specific thing, but they also have these other things that they do. And I have a podcast called Job, Career, or Calling. It's in which people decide, you know, are they working the conveyor belt? Do they have this calling? Do they have both? Because some people either have a regular job or work the conveyor belt, and they also have this thing they really are passionate about. And so you have those things clearly, which is why we defined in the beginning that you have this actual business you've been doing for many, many years, but you've also been doing this resettlement, right? Is that what you would call it?
Yep, resettlement.
In a word, and I know one word is not fair for all the wonderful stuff you just said, but so the resettlement stuff that you do is something else that clearly is not something you do on a Sunday or a weekend. It obviously, there's a lot of waiting, probably there's paperwork, there's handoffs between team members, there's involvement, and sometimes there's rough spots you hit and so forth. So you've had to juggle the time and energy involved in doing that, along with keeping your business running. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So I'm telling everyone that because it is possible to have your career and your calling. And it sounds like you have career and calling. You have the career of the thing that you've been doing for 20 years, and you have this, what seems to me to be sort of a calling, and that you really feel very passionate about the resettlement, because that's not something one would take lightly. Like, oh yeah, on Thursdays I do this resettlement thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. People can talk about making a difference in the world. I always thought it'd be neat to make a difference in the world. Here, we're making a difference in the world. And it might only be with one family at a time. But for that one family, it's huge. And all of what we learned, I eventually put into a book. And the title of the book is 10 million to 1, which sounds like some long odds. But in reality, the meaning of the title is, at the time, there were roughly 10 million refugees in the world. And all I'm trying to say to people is just help one family. The problem is daunting. It's huge. We cannot, even if all of us get together, there would be no reasonable way, nor would it nor would it work to try to handle the entire problem as people of southeastern Wisconsin, or even as people of the entire United States. It's
Mhm.
too big of a problem. But
Right. And I think,
what we can do is help a little bit. We can help one family, and that makes a difference. It makes a difference here, makes a difference in our community, it makes a difference to the family, and it makes a difference in the refugee camp, because we just reduced their population by ever so slightly.
right. And I think it's an example, one of the few examples where every little bit counts. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this is one of those. And you're talking about the amount of people who come over, who are coming, and how the problem is not as simple. We can't flip a switch, because there are another number of elements. Obviously, if we could flip a switch, we would fix the reason that they need to migrate, right? I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
because we would flip it so that they don't have to fear for their lives. They can be happy at home having dinner instead of running away because they have to. So that's one part of this. Another part of it is that we can't just say, okay, yeah, this is, we'll just set a number of X and that everything will be working out. Obviously, as you're demonstrating, which probably a lot of people who even follow a lot of the refugee stuff that we're seeing on the news, and like you said, the definition of these words is really important. The definition of asylum seeker versus refugee is
Mm-hmm.
very, very important. And like you said, they're all immigrants, but these are the two kind of flavors so that you understand what these people are going through. And the amount of people that are coming over makes a difference as well, because I think you said the UN has to assign or verify or whatever that someone is an asylum seeker. Is that correct?
The UN has to verify that they're a refugee.
A refugee. I
Yes,
got that
yes.
backwards. I apologize. Okay.
An asylum
And
seeker
so,
is anyone who shows up another country and says, I need help. I need to be away from my homeland. Can you help me?" That's an asylum seeker. They want
okay.
that shelter. But a refugee has to meet the specific definition of the UN and the US as to what defines them, and they're essentially vetted to be that.
And there a, a limit on the amount of refugees that can be accepted?
Actually, yes. In the United States, Congress and the president every year set a quota, and that is to be the maximum number of refugees that are allowed into the country during that year. The most recent quota, so the year we're in, which doesn't run on a calendar year, I believe it runs from the beginning of October to the end of September. This most recent year, the quota was set at 30,000 refugees, which is, it's about a third of where it has traditionally and historically been. So the numbers are really low right now, which in itself kind of creates some additional problems,
A
because,
bottleneck, if you will, right?
say that
Sort
again?
of a bottleneck, if you will.
Yeah, because especially if refugees that are sitting in camp somewhere they've already been promised that they're going to be headed to the United States, and now suddenly the quota drops and they're stuck in camps, and with a third of the former numbers being allowed in, you can imagine that if that stays that way, then those original maybe 90,000 people who were promised to come in 1 year, now it's going to take them 3 years to come. And there's already people in refugee camps that have been there 15 years waiting for something. So, whoa, sorry about that. I should.
Perhaps you said the secret word or something. I'm not sure what that was.
Yeah, that was a call coming into my Skype,
Oh, okay.
which I can kill so that it doesn't happen again. There we go.
It's interesting that there's a number. Most people, I bet, if you asked, wouldn't know there's a hard number, and so it certainly affects the discussion of allowing people in and walls and borders and all that stuff. Because if there's a finite number of people, none of that matters that much, right? I mean, because that's a limit that you hit way before anything else, I would assume.
Right, and again, this is a number of refugees, and a refugee is a fully vetted immigrant. So by the time they're given permission to come to the United States, the UN has checked their story, the State Department has checked their story, um, our immigration service has checked their story. They've been medically checked to know that they're okay to arrive. Everything has been verified that they are not a threat to anyone here. And when they arrive, they have basically full rights as a citizen, but they're not one. So they can get a social security number immediately. They're eligible to work immediately. They cannot vote, but and they should not leave the country because there's no guarantee they'll be able to get back in. But once they have their green card, which they can apply for at the earliest convenience, I don't remember what that timing is, but once they have the green card, then that opens up travel possibilities for them. And then with 5 years here, they are able to go through the naturalization process and get their citizenship. So someone who arrives as a refugee has a leg up on any other type of immigrant because they've been through this process. And that's one of the reasons why there is a quota. But immigrants can arrive a variety of other ways, whether they're asylum seekers or whether they fly into the country and as is talked about in other places, skip out on those visa requirements and don't leave. That's possible. There's the people coming up from the southern border that they're just trying to flee a horrific situation, and so they're immigrating in big numbers. Many of them are seeking asylum, but we can't control those numbers, and that's part of the problem is that there is no control of those numbers. The people just show up. But interestingly, when there's war in Syria and the people are fleeing Syria to the neighboring countries, they're getting set up in refugee camps so that their disposition can be figured out and what happens next can be figured out. It's much a similar situation for people fleeing Central America coming up here. There's some horrible stuff going on, but we're not setting up refugee camps. We're not doing things to help resolve the situation other than saying, should we be building a wall? How can we prevent people from coming in? And that's where I see the problem is in the political wrangling coming into play is we don't know how to handle that situation, in part because we haven't handled it well in the past. And in part because we don't have a whole lot of experience doing it in the past. Whereas other parts of the world, there have been ongoing issues for long periods of time, and they've learned how to handle the forced migration of people. I don't think we know how to handle forced migration of people.
No, it doesn't sound like we, and this is based on what you're telling me, it doesn't sound like we really have traditionally had a system in place. We didn't really think from the perspective of a system versus saying, okay, we're going to only let this happen to X amount of people, so we sort of forgot about the whole processing, all that stuff first. And which is what you're talking about with the refugee camps, where they move, they get into the camp, and then they go from there.
Yeah.
And so if we put more attention on that portion, perhaps it would act as a buffer to make this whole process easier.
Perhaps, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a very interesting 30,000-foot view, I guess we would say.
Yeah.
And looking at the numbers and looking at how that all works and asylum seekers versus refugees and so forth. So let's come back down to you. So does this mean that you work with the State Department or someone in the government to perform this service?
Mostly no. There are 9 or 10 organizations in the United States that have been authorized to help with refugees once they arrive in our country. And they're authorized by the State Department. They're the ones who actually have that interface with the State Department. By the time it gets to us, it's gone through several layers. So for example, One of those organizations is Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. They're based in Maryland, and they have their affiliates all over the country. The local affiliate in the Milwaukee area is Lutheran Social Services. So Lutheran Social Services does a whole variety of different things, but one of the things they do is refugee resettlement. So they've got a small refugee resettlement office. So any of the refugees from LIRS that are coming to the Milwaukee area will go through the local Lutheran Social Services office. So that's who we worked with. So our involvement has been from LSS onward. So Lutheran Social Services would say, hey, we've got a family coming that has a need. Can your group help out? Can your church help out? Do you
Gotcha.
have volunteers that may be able to help out? So they can
So
work with people in a number of different ways, but they're trying to use their resources as best as they can with volunteers, so that, because their budgets are tight. So,
right.
a staff of 5 people helping 100 families in a year is pretty rough. But if they have those 5 people working with dozens of volunteers, it just gets a whole lot easier.
Okay.
So, yeah, so to answer your question, no, we haven't had to work the government side of things at all.
So your pod doesn't do that, but the organization you're part of does.
Correct, yes.
Because you said there's about 10, and I'm assuming that getting certified or connected or what have you probably is not an overnight process.
No, I would not think so.
So if there's going to be an 11th organization, they're not going to just appear.
Right.
There's going to be a vetting process for that organization,
Yeah, exactly.
and so forth.
And they're usually a very large organization with
right.
with some big reach.
So does that mean that the government then gives funding to groups like yours to be able to do what you do?
I have to say, kind of, but not really.
Okay.
So Lutheran Social Services will get $1,000 for a client, and I believe a client is considering each member of the family. But with that, they need to support that family for 5 years. So that's not much money. Now, when the family arrives and we're working on them, we've had a couple of different scenarios. We've tried moving a family into Wisconsin's what do they call it? The W-2 program, where they're basically getting benefits from the state until they get work, and part of that is that they have to be working immediately. So if we can't get them a job immediately, then we have to get them into some kind of training scenario or some kind of volunteer jobs at different places. We have to do something so that they're effectively earning these state benefits. We didn't like that. It was very complicated. It really kind of took away from our ability to help the family in the short term. So for most families, we followed a different process, which was we got what was called a matching grant. And we did this through Lutheran Social Services. So I don't know all the details of how that worked or where that money necessarily came from. But I know that what we had to do in response to that is we had to provide evidence of all the time that we spent, which created value, and we had to track any donations of goods and of money that were provided for the families, and we had to come up with and be able to justify the value of what we were donating to help this family. And in return, we unlocked some money on a per member of the family basis that we got some control over. So it was technically for the family members to survive, but in most cases, what we had discovered was these families, they don't know, when they first arrive, they don't know what's going on in our society. They don't know how things work here. So we would hold the money a little tight and dole it out to make sure that their rent is being paid, that their utilities are being paid, that everything that they need to live is being paid until they're able to pay for it themselves. So we generally did a ramp
Right.
period. I said earlier that we wanted them to be self-sufficient in 6 months. So let's say our group was able to collect money from people at church to fund the payment of their first month's rent. So that way we could get them into an apartment right away. And then we'd get this matching grant money and put together a schedule. So, okay, so the second month, we probably don't have jobs yet. So we'll use this other money to pay for their rent then. And then their bills are going to start coming along. So we need to set aside some money for that. But then let's start going down, and let's start training that the family themselves has to be responsible for these payments. And I would always sit down with the entire family in that first month to explain, this is how it's going to work. You need jobs because here, take a look at the numbers. You're not used to seeing dollars like this, but your apartment costs $750 a month. Your electricity is going to cost this. You're going to have a water bill, and it's probably going to look like this. And
Right.
there's all these other things that you're going to have to pay for. Oh, and by the way, as a refugee, you were flown to the United States. That was a loan from the US government that you have to pay back. So when that loan payment kicks in, you're going to have to pay this too. So you need to know all these numbers now so you can start planning for them. And so I'm injecting that urgency that you need to get a job as fast as possible because you've got these obligations to pay. And we have some money, yes, but the money we have for you, it's going to run out. We're not here to fund your life. We're here to get you
Right.
started. And
I think the alternate to what you're talking about, very, very specifically, is I think what a lot of people fear, and I think that would be horrible. So I think it's really awesome that you've expanded on that to say, this is our true intent, is to get people, like you said, part of the fabric of the United States, to be contributing. And as the gentleman who had the stomach surgery demonstrated, in a way, he didn't want someone to give that to him. It seemed like he almost needed to do it himself. He needed to get the job himself.
yeah, I think there was pride in there, and it's not what we expected. We wanted to really help him get that job, and in retrospect, yeah, I think it was frustrating for him, and I know it was frustrating for us. But seeing him do it himself and get that job that he worked with for years, he's now retired, but he retired from that same company, and so it was awesome.
Yeah, that's very cool to hear that in place, and that's the intent of this whole program is that. And I think people understanding that would just make people understand this whole process a bit more, because it ends up being this whole black and white thing, and it's clearly not. And the things in the trenches, the things behind the scenes, especially the fact that you're just getting these little tiny grants and these little tiny micro payments, and the fact that you're just doing it because you think it's the right thing to do. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Of the so 30,000 for the entire United States. How much of these people that are refugees have settled in let's say Wisconsin in, let's say, 2018,
Well,
or you can pick another
yeah,
year if you'd like, if you have a better
the
number.
numbers that I'm aware of right now. So in this current year, of the 30,000 coming to the U.S., I don't know how many are being handled by Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, but the quota sent to LSS for this year was 100. So 100 individuals. They could be part of families, they might not be, but a maximum of 100 people, which LSS had already, they've already resettled that number by May. So they're done. They will get 0 more refugees. Now, they're not the only organization in southeastern Wisconsin. International Institute is also here, and they this year have a quota of 213, I believe. And they're probably knocking on the door of that quota too, because if anyone was promised to Lutheran Social Services, LSS now has to take them and hand them off to someone else because their quota has already been met. And this is in stark contrast to just 3 years ago. LSS resettled 374 in the Milwaukee area.
Oh my!
So, and they're comfortable with 500. So I believe that's the number that's been thrown out, that they believe they can handle 500 coming into the area, and right now they're being limited to 100.
And I think that was my next question, was the capacity. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like your organization specifically is definitely operating under capacity.
Yeah, and that's a problem because they have employees, and they get their funding, that $1,000 per person. It basically pays for their staff. So if they've got 100 people at $1,000 a person, that's their entire budget of $100,000 for the year for how many people. And making it worse is that Catholic Charities, which used to resettle in this area, they closed up shop in 2018 because the numbers were so low they couldn't continue any longer. And so there are refugee families that have arrived in the last few years that still may need some support in the next few years. And that has to now rely on Lutheran Social Services and the International Institute to be able to step in and help these other families, for which these other two organizations received $0. And they'll, and they won't get any money to help, but they're in the job of helping, and they'll do it because it's the right thing to do.
And that's an important point, is that you mentioned the word support, because it's not a check the box and, okay, we're done with that, see you later. There's an ongoing effort. You can't just say, okay, well, we have you settled and you have a job, take care.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like a social worker being assigned, that kind of concept.
Right. And the issues are different. Some families, like our original Bosnian family, once the dad got a job, everything was good. I don't think they needed support of any kind from that point forward. Whereas our second family, the Afghani family, that was a lot tougher. The mom in that family had post-traumatic stress issues, and we got her a job. She was working at Goodwill. Heck, she might still be at Goodwill for all I know. I know she was there a long time, and maybe still is, but at first was requiring transportation. She can't drive. And so our group, we had, part of our team was the transportation team, and they would get her to work, and they'd pick her up from work, and every single day, 5 days a week, getting her to and from work, until eventually it became one member of the transportation team was the only one left willing to do this. And it was becoming tough on him. And so he was complaining about it one day, and we said, look, it's time to move on. How can we help another family if we're still stuck helping a previous one? We can't do it. We're limited if our support goes on too long. So we have to learn to let go. And so just give her a warning that next week is the last week, and after that, she's on her own. Mm-hmm. She knows people, she knows how to make arrangements. And, sure enough, once put in that situation, she did just fine. She carpooled, or I don't even remember exactly how it worked out anymore. Maybe she took the bus for a while. That's a viable option too. So
right. But it's a self-sufficiency.
And it is. And that is another step of improvement for the family. Now, did this family have other requirements where they needed LSS over the years? Absolutely they did, because there were things that we we couldn't possibly expect to handle. If we've handled 10 families over a course of 10 years, LSS is working with 100 to closer to 400 individuals every single year. Their experience is way beyond what we can offer. We don't have the ability to take care of medical problems. We don't have the ability to take care of psychological problems. We're in the position of providing love for a family so that they feel that they are welcomed into our country, and so that they have that trust that they can build on so that they can become successful members of society. But when there's serious problems, they need to see someone about a serious problem. And that's where an organization like LSS can step in to handle
Gotcha.
the big things. And it's nice for us to know that they're there for that, so that if there's an issue we don't know how to handle, we can say, hey, I got to pass this back to you because we don't have a clue. And then,
Wow.
and then the experts can step in.
Well, that's just amazing. And I could probably talk with you about this for another 3 hours, but I promised you that I would take less than an hour, and I'm going to keep my promise. So I just wanted to say, is there a shout out you want to give as far as maybe a way for people to learn more about this refugee resettlement work that you do?
Yeah, actually.
And I'll put it in the article itself.
Sure.
So you can just be brief and just give it a URL if you want, in case people don't read the article, but they listen to this.
Yeah. Well, there's always information about my book, which is at 10millionto1.com. So that one's an easy one. But if they want to get like live information about the latest that's going on and the potential for being a volunteer, LSS has every Wednesday, the last Wednesday of every month, for an hour from 5:30 to 6:30. Their office is on South Howell Avenue in Milwaukee. And it's open for anyone who's interested in potentially volunteering. So it's an opportunity
Wonderful.
to learn what's going on. And I'll send you that timing and that address and phone number that you can include.
Yep, and people can look for that in the article itself. That'll appear. You'll see it on iTunes and Google Play and all that good stuff. It'll appear there. So
Perfect.
This has been wonderful. So thank you so much, Jeffrey, for sharing all this really fantastic information with everyone. It's really a interesting glimpse into something that I bet most people have never seen and most people hadn't even thought about. So it's really kind of a neat concept that was so wonderful to just hear about. Thank you so much. I won't take any more of your time.
It's all right. You're welcome. This was fun. I haven't done an interview or a presentation on this topic in a while, and so it was good to have that opportunity.
Well, I'm honored you shared it with us then. I really appreciate that. Well, you take care.
You too. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Hey there. Thanks for listening. You know I always appreciate your feedback, right? Well, here's your chance. You can connect with me on Instagram, via the Alchemy for Life site, or most other social media. If you like this podcast, you may love my new book, Alchemy for Life: Formulas for Success. The 239-page paperback is available on Amazon and everywhere else you get your books. All this info is available at Alchemy for Life. Thank you. See you next week.